My husband was much older than me, and I found myself seeking solace elsewhere. At just 22, I was married to a man who was 65. I didn't choose this marriage. It was forced upon me by my family, who were blinded by his wealth and status. My husband was a successful man, and whenever he visited our home, he came bearing lavish gifts, like crates of expensive fruits. This impressed my family to no end. The decision was sealed when my brother, who worked in his office, unintentionally connected us. One day, my brother forgot his lunch at home, and I went to deliver it to his office. In my haste, I bumped into his boss, my future husband. At the time, I didn't even notice him. I quickly apologized and moved on, but he took my hurried demeanor as arrogance. Later, when he saw me in my brother's office, his attitude changed completely. He was captivated by my appearance. At 19, I was at the peak of my youth, and my looks turned heads everywhere. He became enamored with me, and in an effort to win over my family, promoted my brother and began showering us with gifts. At first, my parents resisted his proposal, but the promise of wealth was too alluring. Soon enough, my family gave in, sacrificing my dreams and desires. They used me as a means to elevate their status, ignoring the vast age difference between us. The marriage contract came with strict conditions. If I ever sought a divorce, I would owe him a significant amount of gold and money. Knowing I had no other choice, I agreed. My parents, who had pushed me into this marriage, severed all ties with me after the wedding. It was as though they were saying goodbye forever. As I moved into my new home, I was overwhelmed by the reality of my situation. My husband already had grown children, and his late wife had passed away years earlier. I couldn't understand why I was brought into this household. Quietly, I followed the maid into the room that had been prepared for me. It was modestly decorated, but it felt cold and unwelcoming. The maid asked, "Will you have your dinner here or in the dining room?" I had no appetite. My heart felt heavy, and the weight of my circumstances left me hollow. "No, thank you," I replied. "If I need anything, I'll get it myself." The maid respectfully greeted me before leaving the room. I stayed in that room the entire day, hungry and thirsty. My husband had left for work, leaving me alone in a strange house. I couldn't help but wonder, who treats their new bride this way? Sure, it was his second marriage, but it was my first. He could have at least considered my feelings. The day dragged on, and as evening approached, my husband returned. The maid informed him that I hadn't eaten all day, and he scolded her before bringing food to my room himself. As he placed the plate before me, he looked at me and said, "I won't be bringing your meals every day. You're the mistress of this house now, so you need to take care of yourself." I nodded silently, but his next words left me stunned. "I married you for my sake, not yours. Don't expect me to give you the happiness a woman desires." His bluntness was like a slap to my face. Why marry me if he had no intention of fulfilling the basic needs of a partner? My confusion and disbelief must have shown on my face because he quickly added, "Eat your food. I'm going to bed. You should get changed and rest too." I barely managed to eat a couple of bites before taking the remaining food to the kitchen. There, I handed the dishes to the maid, who was washing others. As I returned to the bedroom, I found my husband asleep on the couch. Seeing him there filled me with a strange discomfort. It was unsettling, and I felt like a stranger in my own life. I laid on the bed, staring at the ceiling, questioning everything. How did my life come to this? If only I hadn't gone to deliver my brother's lunch, none of this would have happened. I missed my family terribly. The thought of my parents brought tears streaming down my face. I cried myself to sleep that night, consumed by the loss of the life I once knew. The next morning, I woke up to find it was already 11 a.m. After changing, I made my way to the breakfast table. I asked the maid about my husband, and she informed me that he had left for the office at 7 a.m. I then inquired about his sons. The maid said they were just waking up. While I was still talking to her, the older son, a 15-year-old boy, entered the dining area and sat across from me. Without even acknowledging my presence, he demanded breakfast from the maid with an air of arrogance. The maid quickly prepared his meal and started making breakfast for me as well. As he ate, I couldn't help but watch him, hoping he'd say something to me. But he didn't. He ate in silence, got up, and left the table without so much as a glance in my direction. The boy's behavior puzzled me. He neither greeted me nor acknowledged my presence and left the table silently after finishing his breakfast. Sitting at the breakfast table, I found myself once again reminiscing about my family. I missed my mother's homemade parathas terribly. After a light breakfast, I returned to my room, lost in thoughts. My husband's routine remained the same. He would leave for work before I woke up and return late at night, exhausted and silent, heading straight to bed. His indifference confused me, but I chose to endure it without question. He never offered any explanations, and I refrained from asking. Life went on like this, monotonously and without much connection. His younger son, a 13-year-old, was away studying abroad with his maternal uncle. He had always preferred living abroad and disliked being in Pakistan. One day it rained heavily. As I woke up, I looked out the window to see the beautiful weather. The rain was pouring down in torrents, and I felt an urge to step outside and let the raindrops wash over me. Leaving my room, I bumped into the maid, who asked if I wanted breakfast. I told her I'd eat later. I wanted to enjoy the rain first. Before I could step outside, the maid mentioned that my husband's son was also outside enjoying the rain. Curious, I thought this might be an opportunity to start a conversation with him. I stepped into the yard, keeping a respectful distance, watching him play in the rain. Noticing me, he flashed a faint smile, and I realized he might want to talk. He walked closer and asked, "Aren't you joining in?" At first I declined, but he playfully grabbed my hand and pulled me into the rain. Before I knew it, we were both laughing and soaking wet. The rain clung to my clothes, revealing every curve of my body. His gaze lingered, and I could sense his fascination. Something stirred within me. Perhaps it was my own longing for connection. Feeling bold, I removed my scarf and let him take in the sight of me fully. His intense gaze made me feel desired for the first time in ages. That moment in the rain marked the beginning of a friendship. I made it a point to spend more time with him, finding ways to engage him in conversation. Eventually, I learned his name, Salman, and introduced myself as Rabia. We shook hands, and from that day on, we became close friends. Salman began sharing everything with me, his thoughts, his secrets, and even his frustrations. I too confided in him, telling him things I hadn't shared with anyone else, including how neglected I felt in my marriage. Salman listened with empathy and offered me comfort. Over time, our bond grew stronger, and we found ourselves drawn to one another. One day, Salman confessed his feelings for me. His words filled me with a secret happiness. I had longed for affection and attention, and now it was being offered. Though I was thrilled, I pretended to hesitate, knowing he was young and easily swayed. Our relationship began to evolve, and it wasn't long before we became even closer. As our bond deepened, Salman became visibly jealous of my proximity to his father. He disliked seeing us in the same room together. To provoke him, I would intentionally linger around my husband, hoping to draw his attention, but my husband remained indifferent. Disappointed, I began to lose hope. Finally, one day, my efforts paid off. My husband, perhaps sensing something, finally gave me the intimacy I had craved. Yet the experience left me unfulfilled. His age and physical limitations meant he couldn't satisfy my deeper needs. Frustrated and longing, I found myself increasingly drawn to Salman. Every time I saw him, my emotions stirred, and I felt a magnetic pull toward him that I couldn't resist. As soon as my husband left for work each morning, I would make my way to Salman's room. I'd find subtle ways to touch him, ensuring it seemed innocent while igniting his longing for me. To draw him closer, I did whatever was necessary. I began wearing clothes I knew would catch his attention, outfits designed to make any man's gaze linger. One day I wore a short dress I knew Salman liked and walked into his room. Seeing me, he couldn't control himself, and everything happened as it does between a man and a woman. Salman lost himself in the moment, and we crossed all boundaries. Though he was 5 years younger than me, he gave me a pleasure I had never experienced before. Afterward, as reality sank in, Salman seemed ashamed. I comforted him, gently reassuring him, "Don't worry, don't tell your father anything. He won't suspect a thing, and no one will ever know. Besides, this way, your needs will be fulfilled, and so will mine. To gain his trust further, I pretended to cry and shared a few negative remarks about his father, painting myself as a victim. Salman, still naive, fell for my words and began sympathizing with me. Our secret affair grew deeper. Every day became like a honeymoon. As soon as my husband left, Salman and I would spend hours together in my room, indulging in each other's company. Over time, Salman became completely under my influence. He did everything I asked, followed me wherever I wanted to go, and never questioned me. To my husband, it seemed like we were simply bonding as two people close in age, and he remained blissfully unaware. During this time, I also made sure to maintain appearances with my husband, ensuring he wouldn't suspect anything. I kept him satisfied just enough to keep my secrets safe and my game intact. Then came the day my husband had to leave the country for an important business trip. Salman and I were ecstatic, though outwardly we feigned sadness. On the day of his flight, I even shed fake tears to convince him of my sorrow and my supposed inability to cope without him. Inside, however, I was celebrating the removal of the last obstacle between Salman and me. The moment my husband left, I dismissed all the household staff under the pretense of planning a trip with Salman. The maids were happy to take time off and left immediately. Now it was just Salman and me in the house. I was overjoyed. What I previously had to do in secrecy, I could now enjoy openly. We spent every moment together, day and night. Salman's youthful energy matched my longing, and we crossed every boundary imaginable. It didn't take long before we completely forgot the nature of our relationship. We were lost in each other, caring for nothing else. One night as we lay together, deeply engrossed in each other, the unthinkable happened. My husband returned unexpectedly. He walked in on us, catching us in an act he could never have imagined. We were both terrified, but Salman showed no fear. He grabbed my hand and stood confidently before his father. I had already worked hard to erase any fear or respect he might have had for his father. Salman held my hand tightly and said, "You should divorce her. She's not happy with you. She's happy with me, and I want to marry her." Hearing this, my husband was furious. He immediately pulled me away and said, "She's my wife. I know how to deal with her, where to keep her, and when. You don't need to worry about her." Salman, unfazed, pulled me back to his side and said, "Rabia, tell him you love me and don't want to stay with him." For a moment, fear struck me, but Salman's confidence gave me courage. I looked directly into my husband's eyes and said, "I love Salman, and I don't want to stay with you." My words left my husband in shock. He said, "What haven't I given you?" "Money, comfort, everything you could ever want. What more do you need?" Lying through my teeth, I said, "The happiness Salman gives me, you've never given me. You haven't even touched me." My lie ignited my husband's rage. He pulled me closer and said, "So that's what you want? Not money but intimacy? Fine, I'll fulfill that need right now." He dragged me to our bedroom, right in front of Salman. I followed without resisting, and Salman stood there, helpless, watching me leave. Once inside the room, my husband threw me onto the bed. His voice was cold and sharp as he said, "Did you really think I didn't know? I've been aware of your every move. I knew exactly what you were doing, but I pretended not to, just to see how far you'd go. You've betrayed me, and you will pay for it." He continued, "Don't forget, Salman is my son. Everything he did with you, he did under my instruction. Granted, I didn't expect you two to go this far, but it was all part of a test you failed miserably. Salman promised me he'd prove you unfaithful, and he did. You fell right into the trap." His words left me stunned. My mind reeled as I processed the truth. I felt a deep sense of regret and shame. My husband's next revelation crushed me further. "Salman doesn't love you. He was just testing you. You mean nothing to him." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. A boy, barely a man, had outsmarted me, played with my emotions, and used me as part of some twisted father-son scheme. My foolishness had cost me everything, and the realization was unbearable. As these thoughts swirled in my mind, my husband threw me onto the bed and unleashed his anger on me. I couldn't recognize the man before me. He was overtaken by a fury I had never seen. He opened the bedside drawer, pulled out a tablet, swallowed it, and within minutes it was as if he had gained superhuman strength. At first I didn't resist. I lay there quietly, finding fleeting moments of pleasure in his intensity. But as time went on, his forcefulness became unbearable. I pleaded with him to stop, to take a break, but every time I begged, he only grew more relentless. Hours passed. 4 excruciating hours. By then, I was completely drained, both physically and emotionally. My body couldn't take it anymore. I clasped my hands together and begged for mercy, but his response was cold and cutting. "This is all I've ever wanted from you. I don't care about a life of respectability. I want this." It was then that I realized he wasn't just venting anger. He was exacting revenge. In desperation, I grabbed his feet and begged for forgiveness. I couldn't endure the pain any longer. Finally, my body gave out and I lost consciousness. When I came to, he was standing over me, his expression void of any remorse. Several hours later, I emerged from my room, physically weak and emotionally shattered. The maid informed me that Salman had already left for the airport. He was heading to his uncle's house abroad. Her words brought back everything my husband had said, and it all rang true. He had orchestrated everything, and Salman had played his part in destroying me. My life, my dreams, my home, it was all gone. I couldn't even return to my parents. What face could I show them? My husband divorced me and threw me out of his house, calling me a woman who could never belong to just one man. He didn't just sever ties with me, he stripped me of any dignity I had left. Completely alone and broken, I decided to end my life. I deliberately stepped in front of a speeding car, hoping to escape the misery. But fate had other plans. I survived, only to find myself in the hands of people who were even more merciless than life itself. I was taken to a place where no respectable person could ever imagine being. These people ran an illicit trade, and I became one of the many women under their control. Every night a different man would claim me, and I endured unspeakable pain and humiliation. My body became an object, a tool for others' desires. I lost all sense of self. Some men were so cruel that their actions left scars, both physical and emotional. But what choice did I have? This torment became my new reality, my daily existence. I accepted it as my punishment. After all, wasn't this what I deserved? I had betrayed my husband for fleeting desires, and now I was paying the price. I often thought back to that moment with Salman, wishing I could undo it all. If only I had remained faithful to my husband, I could have been living a life of respect and comfort, even if it lacked passion. My husband, though much older, cared for me deeply. At my slightest call, servants would come running. At a single gesture, my husband would go to any lengths to make me happy. But I had destroyed it all with my own hands. My greed and betrayal had cost me everything. Now all I could do was endure this miserable life, haunted by the memory of what I had lost. One day, a kind-hearted man came to see me. He paid my price and gave me a chance to escape the nightmare I had been living. I seized the opportunity and left that place behind, hoping to find a way to rebuild my life. Now homeless and wandering from place to place, I was lost and uncertain about my future. One day, while walking aimlessly through the streets, I suddenly saw Salman. As soon as he noticed me, he quickened his pace and stopped me. "Rabia, where have you been all this time?" he asked, his breath uneven. His voice and presence brought back all the bitterness I had buried deep within me. Angrily, I snapped, "What now? Another one of your schemes? Are you here to ruin my life all over again?" It had been 2 years since we last saw each other. Salman looked at me with genuine remorse and told me something that left me speechless. My husband had passed away. He then shared that before his death, my husband had made a final wish. He had asked Salman to marry me. Hearing this, I was filled with mixed emotions. Salman, with tears in his eyes, fell at my feet and begged for forgiveness. He expressed regret for everything he had done in the past and asked for another chance. I had nowhere else to go, no place to call home, and no one to turn to. It felt as though fate was giving me a second chance. Perhaps this was God's way of helping me stand again. After much thought and hesitation, I decided to honor my late husband's wish and agreed to marry Salman. With a heavy heart, I also turned to God, seeking forgiveness for all my sins. I prayed earnestly, for I knew that He is the most merciful and the most forgiving. Salman and I began a new chapter in life. This time I vowed to live with integrity and gratitude, cherishing the chance I had been given to start anew.